Before I begin tonight, I want to tell you that this is a special honor for me. Not only did I attend Central Virginia Community College, my wife attended Central Virginia Community College, and my mother went back to school to Central Virginia Community College. This college has enhanced and changed my life, and graduates, it will yours too. It is a great honor for me to be here. I would like to talk to you in the brief time I've given about 4 quick items. 1, I want to share with you a bit of my journey. I want to tell you some about great men who have accomplished great things from diverse backgrounds. I want to encourage you to remember the college that you've graduated from, the adversities you've worked your way through, and your obligation as graduates. And I want to encourage you to never quit and find now your next big mission. You know, I'm going to lead you through briefly here a number of faces, diverse as they are, a number of faces. Recently, I had my youngest son, Wesley, near me, and he was rubbing on my face, and then on his face, and then on my face, and then his face. And finally, he looked at me and said, "Dad, did God make your face?" And I said, "Yes, Wesley, he did." He said, "Well, did God make my face?" He said, "Yes, he made your face too." And after a puzzlement for a while, he looked at me and he said, "You know, Dad, God's getting better at making faces." And when you see it on a screen that big, it's true. I want to tell you about some of the faces I've come to tell you about here today. First is a brief outline of my journey. It is the most modest of the ones I'll share with you, but if I was to sum it up, I would tell you it would be this: learning over a lifetime for me to say yes when others said no. And despite a very modest upbringing, learning to overcome my constant fear of failure. As most of you know, I grew up here in Central Virginia. We didn't come from a wealthy background. I would describe it for you, but you know what poor is. But during that time, we had great love in our family, and certainly during the time that I lived in a trailer court in Central Virginia in Campbell County, it was abundantly clear that I didn't come from the right side of the tracks. Any of you guys not from the right side of the tracks? A bunch of us here, is that right? And certainly not from the right side of the tracks to run for public office. You know, when I was 23 years old, I was still going to school. I was a program director for a local radio station. I had hired a young man named Dan who was working with me. He was passionate about public service, and we decided that we would help someone get elected to city council. By the time when the state forms came back, we had found no one to run. Dan and I determined that one of us would have to run, and given the fact that I was the only one over 21, believe it or not, I became the candidate. After that, I remember the newspaper stories that said, the incumbent that is there, the people who are running, and this young kid from Lynchburg. During that time, we had the opportunity to visit with thousands of people and residents of the area, and in the end, the people of Virginia allowed me by nearly 60% to win that race. You know, not long after that, I first ran for the House of Delegates. I'll never forget that one. It was somewhat similar to my first run, but once again, I was not the right side of town, and I also did not, and by many people's means, consider to have what it took to run. And many thought also I was too young to run. If I had won that race, I would have replaced James Madison as the third youngest person to serve in the state legislature. I'll never forget the night of the nomination. This is where you become a candidate. That night, we had a precarious vote. It was me against no one, and literally no one, and no one was winning. It was hard to believe. That night, we finally had someone stand up that was going to speak, I thought maybe in favor of me. They spoke for no one. That night, Carol Freeman was that person. He was a great lawyer for Lynchburg. Carol got up and said, "You know what the rules are? The rules are if I stay in this room and I vote one way or another for Steve Newman, I've got to, because of the rules, support him for the House of Delegates. He's too young. He didn't come from the right side of the tracks. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to leave the room." And he did. Well, the vote came right after that. And believe it or not, I won. I beat no one, 21-20. If Carol Freeman, my now dear friend who's passed recently, had actually stayed in the room, I would have actually lost the race under Robert's Rules of Order by a score of 21-21, which is a tie, and I would not have won. You know, when I've gone through my life, I have found that there were many times that I could have said, you know, I'm not from the right side of the tracks. I am a little too young. But it is those times that I've learned to overcome my fears and learned how to say yes when others said no. For the past 20 years at the Capitol, I have had to remind myself over and over again, although it is natural to fear, overcome your fears. And I would encourage you graduates tonight, no matter what side of the tracks you come from, put the fear of your failures aside as you have in getting to this point and learn to say yes when others are saying no. The next person I want to tell you about is much more important. He's a man that had a great impact on our city, a man that came from a very different background than I did. His name was George. George was born in Manhattan in 1924, and George was destined for greatness. Much was expected of George, and when asked how much schooling he had, George simply said, "I went all the way." He graduated from Brooklyn Tech in 1943, Wesleyan University in 1947, served then in World War II, and then on to New York University School of Law. When George got back and went to Wall Street, he was an instant success. First at Hartford Insurance Company, then an analyst at Shelby Davis, and in charge of all insurance stocks at Bly & Company. But in 1963, he and his wife Bonnie moved to Little Lynchburg. And when he did, he was put in charge of then a relatively small company called First Colony Life Insurance Company. Within a few years, George Stewart turned what was a small company into a world-class term insurance company. First Colony would eventually, under his leadership, employ thousands of Virginians. Eventually, First Colony was purchased by Genworth Financial, and you know them today as one of the backbones of our local economy. We lost George 13 years ago, and although George came from great opportunity, he is remembered for what he gave back. George was a leader. He was a leader in saving Thomas Jefferson's popular forest that we enjoy today. He was the chairman of the great charity, the Greater Lynchburg Community Trust. He helped start Steps with Links to assist inner-city children. And he was known as the modern co-founder of the Lynchburg 10-miler. Yes, George came from great opportunity, high expectations, but he met those expectations. Today, he is revered for what he gave back. Graduates, I want to urge you to emulate George Stewart. Have the blessing of your newfound education being a launching point for giving back. The last person I want to tell you about is truly a hero of mine. He may be the most important person you've never heard of. His name was Nikola. Nikola was often gone by Nick. Nick was born to very humble beginnings in Serbia, what is now modern-day Croatia. He was the fourth of 5 children. Nick was not an outgoing type. His parents gave their lives to the Orthodox Church in trying to help others. One of Nick's sisters that he adored died when he was just 5 years old in a riding accident, and although Nick was brilliant, his mind just seemed to always wander. Some have said that Nick did study at the Austrian Polytechnical Institute in Graz, but in fact the college reportedly says that he did not graduate. He did not even attend more than 2.5 years, and somehow he just got lost and dropped out. Not long after that, Nick suffered a nervous breakdown and seemed as if his life was over. But he was not one to ever ultimately quit. He again tried education, but after only one semester at Ernest University, he was forced to drop out. Nick was constantly ill and his beloved mother finally passed away, and it appeared to be the end of Nicholas. But there was a spark, and there was a drive to never quit. You see, Nick had taught himself the theory of electricity, and one day he was walking home and he began to carve into the sand and the dirt in front of him something that had been going on in his mind for many days. As he carved, he gave rise that moment to what ultimately was called the rotating magnetic induction motor. You and I would call that the modern electric motor that drove the 21st century reborn. It is no less than a cornerstone of our modern society. But even after that, Nick was lost. His fame never came to him, and he was somewhat undiscovered. But it was one friend, just one friend, who saw this young, brilliant man and took him under his arm, dressed him in a coat and not much more than he was wearing, sent him to the United States with one item in his pocket, and it was a letter. It was a letter addressed to none other than Thomas Edison. Nick went to the United States, found Thomas Edison, pulled the letter out of his pocket, and gave it to the great inventor. When the letter came out, Edison read the letter, and it read as follows: Dear Mr. Edison, I know two great men. You are one of them. The other one is this young man. Soon, Edison hired Nick. And when he did, he found that he was brilliant. Soon he promised Nick, in today's dollars, to give him $1 million if he could design for him a direct current generator that could help him develop his new electrical grid. It wasn't long after that that Nick actually came up with that generator, presented it to a surprised Edison, and Edison looked at it, thanked Nick, and said, as to the money, you've got to learn American humor. I was just kidding. We will not pay you. Nick had enough. Nick left that day, as you could imagine, and he went back to digging ditches. But Nick never gave up. He then sought out another great American inventor called George Westinghouse. And while with Westinghouse, Nick developed something quite amazing. Nick, in the time with Westinghouse, invented a product, a technology known as alternating current. Ladies and gentlemen, alternating current is the backbone of the American electrical grid. Direct current, as Edison had provided it, would never have worked. You had to have a power station every 2 miles for it to be effective. Alternating current allowed us to be here today. It gives us the opportunity to meet in this room, to have the air conditioning that we have. It allows the power for the microphones and nearly every other invention in the modern era. But I would let you know that this young man, whose last name was Tesla, did not stop there. Nikola Tesla went on to have some of the most tremendous inventions of the 21st century. He was credited later with inventing the U.S. version of the X-ray, the loudspeaker. He invented the remote control. He invented wireless technology. He invented the modern power grid, and in 1943, the United States Supreme Court held that Nikola Tesla had developed the basis for the radio, not Marconi, as most had believed. Upon his death, J. Edgar Hoover declared that all of Tesla's papers and research was to be seized for national security. Nikola Tesla was an unlikely hero. He was an unlikely hero that one determined that he would never, never, never give up. Tonight, graduates, I want to urge you to be a Tesla. Determine that if you ever come from the wrong side of the tracks, that you have a responsibility to give back, to give of your talents, and to never give back. Never let adversity serve to limit your future. Ladies and gentlemen, I have one more admonition I'd like to give you, and that is this. I'm going to encourage you tonight to never forget and to remember the adversity that brought you here tonight. Remember the triumph that you have seen at CVCC. Some of you will recall the old spiritual from Tommy Walker. It goes like this: we will remember, we will remember, we will remember the works of your hands. We will stop and give you praise, for great is thy faithfulness. We will walk through life's darkest valleys. We will look back at all that you have done. Throughout the ages, you've been our shelter, our peace in the midst of the storm. We will remember, we will remember, we will remember the works of your hands. I want to encourage you tonight to look back and remember. Remember CVCC as you go forward and the impact that it had on your life. Go back often. Remember the struggles and how you came through them. Remember tonight as a triumph over adversity. Remember your classmates, remember your friends, and remember the professors who brought you to this point. Remember that it's natural to have fears, but remember those that never gave up. Class of 2011 of Central Virginia Community College, I leave you with this. This is a wonderful beginning and not an end. It is a time for you to find your next great adventure. Learn to defeat fear. Be willing to say yes when others say no. Be a George Stewart and find ways to give back. Find ways to lift up others. Be a Tesla and find a way to overcome the adversities. Rededicate yourself to a new success and a next great mission. And never, never, never give up, and remember the blessings that have been given to you by Central Virginia Community College. Graduates, may God bless you and have a good night.